Welcome to the Non-Obvious Insights Show. I'm your host, Rohit Bhargava, and every week I go through hundreds of news sources to curate the most interesting and underappreciated stories that you might have missed. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about how Argentine soccer clubs and women's roller derby leagues are paving the way for sports to return, Walmart's summer plans to convert their parking lots into drive-in theaters, how design and architecture firms are reimagining travel, and a cool Japanese mask that doubles as a universal translator. In addition, we'll look at a new study on the role of legacy in who gets into Harvard, how a British brand of baby wipes created a surprisingly vibrant community, and how the coronavirus effect became a gift for many small farms. All that and another segment of my non obvious double take story of the week that should get you to think twice, and another non obvious book release of the week are coming in just a few seconds. We are live streaming to Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope, and the show starts right now. Happy Thursday, Non-Obvious Nation. It's yet another week, yet another batch of stories, and this has been a week full of video for me. If you were part of our Non-Obvious virtual summit yesterday, you probably saw a lot of me talking about my book, but also a lot of others. We had 42 speakers as part of this summit. It was all day long and actually more than a day's worth of content because we released a new video every 15 minutes, and many of them were longer than 15 minutes. So I guarantee most people haven't had a chance to go through all of those, but it was a great, great success. So if you're just joining me on my show for the first time, if you were part of our summit yesterday, or if you missed it, on my channel, there's a playlist where you can see all of the videos completely for free for the next week. So you've got a week to go through all that content. If you're interested in the topic of book marketing or publishing, that will be a great resource for you. So thank you so much for joining me on this show. Thank you for joining me for the summit. I can't wait to get ready to start these stories and talk about them with you. And let's get going with the first one, which I absolutely loved as a soccer player, which was Argentinians or Argentines, I've heard both terms used, developed a way of playing soccer in a socially distanced fashion. And as you can see from some of these images, it basically involves players staying in their squares, moving around, no tackling. You get a penalty if you go outside of your square, and you can still play soccer. And I thought that this story, along with another one that came from Wired magazine of the women's roller derby that developed a 5-point, 5-stage, I think they called them tiers, 5-tiered plan for returning to sports, was this really important thing that many people are trying to figure out, which is how do we get back to playing sports? And this is a theme that I think we're going to see more and more as we get into the summer, of many different ways for sports to come back, both for watching as spectators, but also for playing, for trying to get us back to playing sports. And how does sports change? And these stories together kind of looked at both sides of it. One is just people inventing a new way to play their sport safely. And another, the Women's Roller Derby League, has really become, it's a great article. If you do anything with sports, I highly recommend you read it, because what they've created is this 5-tiered plan for how they'll return to sports and what needs to happen in the ecosystem around where they are in order for playing that sport to be safe. So it's not just our players have to wear masks or whatever the things are you could do to your players. It's also, where are we going to play? How many cases of COVID have there been in that space? And based on that and all of these other criteria, they've laid out this really detailed plan for how to get back to sports. And it's so good, in fact, that many other sports leagues are borrowing it and trying to reuse it for their own sports league. So there's going to be more innovation around this. I saw an ad, I believe the US Open, which is coming up in August, is going to be played by the players, but with no spectators, except for television. And so there is going to be this reinvention of sports, and it's a big theme that I continue to watch. And every week I see news stories all about that. So as a reminder, every week we talk about non-obvious insights and non-obvious stories of the week. I spend hours and hours every week gathering the most interesting stories and sharing them with you. If you get my weekly email newsletter, you will have seen some of these stories, but not all of them, because I share a bonus level of stories in this weekly show. But if you prefer reading them in that format, you can always subscribe at nonobvious.com/subscribe to get them by email. And you can tune into this show and watch the archive or listen to the archive of this show as well. The next story that I was reading about was Walmart's plans for the summer. And what was interesting to me about this is they announced that on their app, they've got many different games and activities and things for the kids, which is super important because many of us who are parents have kind of been struggling with this. What do we do with the kids now? Like all of the summer camps that they may have been planning to go to are not happening or happening in a different way. And so we need different activities to be able to keep them busy. And what Walmart does is they combine it with, I think, what may be one of their best assets that people don't appreciate enough, which is they have huge parking lots. Huge parking lots. And what they decided to do is create a drive-in theater in these parking lots. So I'm not sure if it's coming to every Walmart. I don't remember. It probably was in the article. But it's interesting because what they're trying to do is provide something that brings people to the store, which obviously retailers want to do, and they're integrating it with the store. So if they'd have the drive-in movie there, you can order your snacks from the Walmart and somebody will bring it out to your car, which makes sense. But it is a model that, to me, it's a great example of non-obvious thinking too, because in this moment, you're using every asset that you have. And for Walmart, that happens to be these huge parking lots, which I know are also used by many people who have RVs who are traveling across the country, any country, really. I think you can do this internationally as well. And you can use their parking lots in the nighttime, some of them, I think. And so it's just another example, like using the assets that you've got. And I thought it was a great story for that reason. Another story that captured my attention this week as a traveler and as somebody who's really kind of wondering, when am I going to be able to go back to traveling? When am I going to be able to take that next trip? And what I enjoyed about this article is that there were lots of visuals of reimagining the experiences of travel. Because one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, we could go and take trips to places that are isolated, right? You could go to a log cabin somewhere. You can go to places that have wide open spaces. But the problem is getting there because there's lots and lots of people in the airport. There's lots and lots of people in those set places like train stations. And what was cool about this article is there were visuals of how the seats could be changed, how there could be dividers put in, all of those sorts of things that would allow you to make that part of travel a little bit safer. And if that could happen, then I think maybe more people would be willing to go to some of these more isolated places, because when you get there, you can be isolated much more. The problem is getting there in the first place. Another story, that this was kind of a quick hit story, but it really got me smiling, because what I thought about as I was reading this story was that these masks that we are wearing now and that we will probably be wearing for the foreseeable future don't just need to be utility, but also fashion accessories. And I shared a story some time ago about how there were designers were sort of redesigning these. But this story was about a Japanese company that turned the mask into a translator. And so now you can use the mask to translate what you're saying into 8 different languages. And the sci-fi geek in me really kind of loved this, because I'm like, man, that would be so cool to be able to put on this mask and now it transforms your voice into all of these different languages. But it was also an example of just how far this reimagining is likely to go. I mean, when we're in a world where we need to wear this mask more and more frequently, like, why not turn it into this thing that could do all of these other services that we can benefit from? Like, for example, translating live, which previously only came from like Star Trek or any of those shows, right? Now we can do it, we can get it live. So, as a reminder, all of these stories are shared in my weekly email. And if you're not getting the weekly email, definitely subscribe to that. But every week, I also share videos like this and other videos from various summits and things that I'm doing on my YouTube channel. So, what you'll be able to do is subscribe there, and you can get not only the email, but subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can get access to all of these videos consistently with a little reminder every time a new one comes. So definitely do that, and join me whenever you can. And let's talk about some stories that didn't make it into the email. So this is the next phase of stories, the second round of stories. And one of the features that I do every week is what I call the non-obvious double take story of the week. And this week, the non-obvious double take story was about a study of Harvard students that found that 43% of white students are legacy athletes or related to donors or staff. And then the subheadline on this story says the number drops dramatically for Black, Latino, and Asian American students, with less than 16% each coming from those categories. Now, when you think about that headline, immediately it seems like that should make you mad, right? That should confirm various biases that we have. But what I started thinking, this was the double take part of the story, was, well, if 43% of students are making it into a top tier school like Harvard because they have some sort of connection or ability, right? So legacy is the connection. Your parents went there, somebody else went there. And ability is you're an athlete and you got a scholarship and you went there. What about the other 57%? Like, that's more than half. How did they get there? Are they coming from disadvantaged places? Are they coming from a wide variety of places, or are they all the same? And also, this was a study that said 43% of white students. Well, how many of the students are white? And so, like, there's all of these gaps in these numbers when you see a headline like that and you don't exactly know how many people it's really talking about. And that's one of the challenges to try and decipher when you read a story like this, which is, on the surface, it's like, oh man, that's totally wrong. How come all these kids are getting in because their parents went there, or because they're related to somebody? That's not fair. But then if you start to unpack it, like, well, what is it actually saying? I don't really know. I don't really understand. And so, to me, the only way to get to the bottom of a story like this is to read about this study here and go back to the study, go back to the actual study and figure out what it meant. Right. And in this case, like, when you do that and when you start to go back, you realize that, yeah, there are a lot of people who get into a school like Harvard because they have access. And that is at every level. It's not only white students that are getting in because they have access. It's also legacy students from other cultures that are getting in too. There's just less of them because there were less historically. But the bigger challenge is the weight that we place on something like that. And one of the other stories that I saw this week was about how many universities, including, I believe, Harvard, are going back to fully online for the next year, but not changing their tuition structure at all. And that was a big deal for a lot of people, because now it's like, well, am I really gonna, or is someone, right, really going to pay $50,000 to send a student to a school where there's no actual school that they physically go to, and they miss out on all of that experience? And this is why a lot of students are thinking about trying to defer for a year just to wait and see how this works out. And so, lots and lots of flux in the world of higher education, but the stories that come out like this sort of get you thinking, I think, one dimensionally about it, and not necessarily giving you that broader perspective. And so we have to go and seek that broader perspective out for ourselves. More lighthearted story this week was about a brand of baby wipes called Water Wipes from the UK that opened up a virtual hub for new parents and for expectant parents. And it's a great idea because in this moment right now, if you're expecting a baby or if you just had a baby, the support that you would have otherwise gotten in terms of lots of people coming over, people helping out, being able to kind of get family to come, a lot of that is not available in the same way that it was. And it must be, I mean, my kids are older now, but I'm just thinking back to, like, that moment. It must be really hard to be a new parent right now. It must be tough. And what this virtual community sponsored by this baby wipe brand does is they bring in a psychologist and they allow these parents to talk to one another and support each other and basically say, you know what, you're doing okay. Like, it's all right. You're doing a good job. Like, you're good enough. And it seems like a really simple message, but I can imagine how powerful that would be for people who've been robbed of that whole support infrastructure because they happen to have had a baby right now in this time. And I loved the empathy of that. I just thought that was like such a nice story and such a beautiful way of supporting your audience, and not just saying, hey, you need baby wipes because you got to stay sanitary, right? I mean, I'm sure they sell more baby wipes because of this, but it was just a great effort all around. Another story that I was reading about this week that I thought was kind of cool was the story of the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. And what Entrepreneur decided to do is they said, well, who's making an impact in the world right now? And one of the things that I read in the story, it was so funny, not funny, but interesting, I think, was that they, in their editorial meeting, said, well, no one wants to be the face of COVID. Like, who would we put on the cover to be like, this person's profiting? or doing really well because of this moment. Nobody wants to be that guy or that woman. And so what they decided to do instead is put 137 different people who were doing interesting things on the cover. And it really supported the key message of the magazine itself. And I think that what they put out into the world, which is if the world is going to get better, it's going to be entrepreneurs who do it. And this is a magazine that's meant to support those entrepreneurs and celebrate them. And I thought it was a nice way of doing that. And some of the stories, and you can actually go online and you can see who are these 137 people. And it is really interesting who they selected and the range of people and what those people are doing. So I definitely recommend checking out this article, seeing who those people are. Pick up the magazine. I'm a big fan of magazines, so like pick up the physical magazine or order it online and get it into your mailbox. It's definitely worth doing. I thought it was an excellent story. Another thing that I had not thought about, but like some of these stories, sometimes during the week, I will read a story, and when I read it, I'll kind of have this moment where I'm like, oh, yeah, of course that's true. Like, of course I should have known that. Like, that would totally be true. And this one was one of those stories where it was about the coronavirus effect for small farms. And this idea that when people have been a little bit more afraid to go into the grocery store, maybe all of the supply that they're used to having at the store has not necessarily been there. People have been turning to their local farms and to their local farmers market. And what this article talked about in the Christian Science Monitor, and there was actually a video around this article as well, was these farmers who've been experiencing these huge surges in interest from their local community, where people want to buy more from their local farmer because they feel more trustworthy, they have more deeper connection to them, they feel safer. And one of the struggles that the farmers have had as a result of this is just having enough supply, growing enough to be able to meet that demand. And one of the things that I've read multiple times, and I know there's been lots of documentary films about this as well, is like the squeezing out of small farms by big agricultural kind of farm machines, like those farms that are owned by large agricultural companies. And the small farms are trying to survive in whatever way they can. And so I just thought this was a nice side effect, a silver lining, if you will, of this whole situation, that maybe some of these small farms can create these deeper connections with their communities and therefore maybe survive and not be swallowed up by the larger entities. The final thing I want to share with you is the non-obvious book of the week. So every week I go into many different sources, and I get, as a author but also as a publisher, I get informed of lots of new releases. I read all the trade publications of what's coming out, and I select a book that is my choice for the book of the week. Now, sometimes I will have gotten an early version and I would have been able to read it. Sometimes I haven't, but I will. And either way, I want to share with you something that is coming out right now that I think is hugely valuable. And my selection for the book of the week this week is a book called Ghosting the News. By an author named Margaret Sullivan, who is a journalist who used to run a local paper in Buffalo and then moved to the New York Times and was at some of the big papers. And what she talks about is something that I actually mentioned in a previous show, and Hassan Minhaj actually talked about in one of his shows as well, which is that when we lose local papers, we're losing a really significant part of our culture and of our media information landscape. And that's what her book talks about, which is when we start squeezing out these local papers, we rely on these big sources of media and we lose the ability to have this deeper connection to local media. And like I said in that show, and like Hassan Minhaj said, this is not about local TV news. This is about like newspapers and the stories that local newspapers report on. And I think that this book is such an important topic. It's such a devastating reality that these newspapers are not able to survive. I mean, it makes financial sense why it's happening. The advertising revenue has gone down, the media diet's gotten more fragmented. I mean, any reason you can point to, it makes sense why it's happened. But I think it's such a shame. And I think that as a consumer of media, one of the things I actively try and do, and I tell anybody else to do as well, is consume media from many different places, yes, but also support it financially. I mean, subscribe to things. pay for access to the media. I don't believe all media should be free. I believe that if we find good quality media that we're consuming, like, we should be willing to pay for it, and we should want to pay for it because it's the same mindset that encourages people to give money to charity, which is that it's a positive thing to do that creates a better world. And in some ways, media kind of is the same thing. And I think we've gotten into the culture sometimes where we don't feel like we need to pay for it because it's freely available online. But if we did, it would be a much, much better thing. And I think this is one of those books, Ghosting the News, that I highly recommend to be able to kind of support that and to at least learn more about it and what's happening. So, those are our non obvious insights of the week. Thank you so much for watching this show and watching these non obvious insights. If you enjoyed these insights and you want to get weekly updates from me, you can subscribe to my channel where you'll get a notification every Thursday when we're about to go live with another edition of the Non Obvious Insights show. And for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.